Ability.
You've been hearing about DEI training. It's supposed to make us aware of our unconscious prejudice. But a former DEI trainer, rhetoric professor Eric Smith, says today's DEI training does more harm than good. Here's my entire interview with Smith.
People do need to be woken up.
Yeah, and that was the point. Diversity walk or something like that, when somebody says how many people grew up in a single parent household and things like that.
If you were encouraged to attend college by your parents and your family members, take one step forward.
The diversity or privilege walk is supposed to teach us how much more or less privilege we have.
If you grew up in a household with two parents, step forward. And at the end of it, the most privileged people are in front and the least privileged people are in back. I did that, but it wasn't to guilt anybody. It wasn't to say, you need to check your privilege. It was to say, look at the world here. Look at what's going on. We should be aware of these things.
Why not tell people to check their privilege? Some of us have privilege.
Yes, but some of us are accomplished, and that's being called privilege. And I think that's unfair. It's one thing to be born on third base and act like you hit a triple. It's another thing to be born on first base and still second, right? And again, third. That's an accomplishment.
And that's frowned upon now?
Well, it's frowned upon by people who find it strategic to frown upon it, yes. If you can keep this race thing going, then you will always have a business in getting rid of racism. Even Ibram X. Kendi proposed a branch of government, right, regarding anti-racism. And what do you need to justify that? You need racism. It's in his best interest to perpetuate racism, in order to maintain a career. Then there are people who are like, wow, well, this is a, billion-dollar industry. I'm going to get in on this. Do my trainings and things like that and accuse people of racism just to keep it perpetuated, right? To keep it going so that it never goes away, so that I keep making my money or
It is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yes, it
now.
is.
Every big company.
Yeah.
They feel they have to.
Right, and there it is. They feel like they have to. They have to say something. They have to signal to the world that they're doing something. Whether that something is effective or not is secondary.
Is it effective?
It doesn't seem to be effective, no. In fact, it seems to be doing worse. It seems to be making people less likely to interact with people who are unlike them, because it's like a minefield now.
Less likely to interact?
Yes. After a training where you hear things about microaggressions, right? Microaggressions. If you ask somebody what they do for a living, somehow that's racist, right? If you learn that, then why would you take a chance?
I better not talk to Eric because I might say something wrong.
Precisely.
Any other ideas about this not working?
Well, if you compel people, to go to certain things just out of pure resentment, they may, back away and rebel. I saw that myself even when I was doing diversity training that wasn't especially woke.
All this money is spent, all these courses, all this time. Why doesn't it get the results they want?
Well, it might be getting the results they want. Depends on who you mean by they.
Why doesn't it bring racial harmony to the office?
Because diversity, equity, and inclusion, those words don't mean what most people think they mean. Diversity is diversity of bodies, of skin color, ethnicity, not of thought. You can have many different bodies, but they have to be, basically on the same page ideologically. That page is often something akin to critical social justice. Inclusion means, well, you can't make people uncomfortable. And in a world of microaggressions, that's easy to do. So now inclusion means I'm going to silence myself and not talk to the black people, right? And equity, as most people know, does not mean equality. It means equality of outcome, right? We have to make sure everybody ends up at the same place, no matter how they got there, which is why we get rid of aptitude tests, which is why we get rid of AP classes, which is why we have equitable math and things like that. That's equity.
Because there were too many Asians and whites in the AP class.
Apparently, or not enough black people. And that's interesting. It's easy to say people are doing this out of resentment, right? But some people may be doing this out of love. Is it hate for white people or love for black people? And what's motivating them? Now, yes, they're still misguided, but they see this as, well, the ends justify the means, and the ends are racial equality and black dignity, so I'm going to do what I have to do.
But it's real. We whites have most of the power, most of the money. We hold most of the high positions. Some of that is genuine achievement. Some is racism.
Yeah. So what do? You give other people the opportunity to acquire those things themselves. You get them into a good school. You bring back institutions like churches and other after-school programs. You teach them what it means to be an entrepreneur in this world. It's not just about victimhood. It's not just about white oppressors. There's some of that going on, but there's also some agency that we have, to get to where we want to go. And if we keep saying, well, there's nothing we can do, we can't win because of the white oppressor, then what is that going to do to an entire group of people? Nothing good.
And what's it going to do if you say being on time is not a good thing?
Right. Or that, a standardized English, at least having proficiency in it, is a form of oppression. What are you really doing? I mean, if you wanted to hold down a group of people without them knowing it, this woke thing is a good strategy.
Another example, this is a LinkedIn course by Robin DiAngelo.
Yes, inspired by Robin DiAngelo anyway.
Inspired.
Yes.
And this blew up on the internet. Why?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, it was Coca-Cola that got caught doing this. I show this to my students every semester as an exigence. So what do you do, conflict management? What do you do when your company does this? I actually use that example as a kind of lesson. But what was happening there is a diversity training in which whiteness in general was the problem. And the thesis statement, if you will, of this training was try to be less white.
Try to be less white means?
Try to be less European or Eurocentric or more Enlightenment driven. Try to be less classically liberal.
Be less oppressive. Be less arrogant. Be less ignorant. It's reasonable.
That is by no means a white thing. But the point is to demonize the other side as much as possible. Marcuse called this repressive tolerance. Nothing the other side can do can be accepted. We have to demonize them in all ways.
And the white leaders of these groups pay money to be trashed.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage, right?
Hundreds of studies suggest anti-bias training doesn't reduce bias.
I believe that. Yeah, what it's doing is creating more chaos, in certain places. Now, maybe there are places that are having, big issues with race relations and things like that, and that can be dealt with in various ways. But some places are, people are getting along, right? They're working well together. But the implicit bias training is put there because human resources said we have to do this, right? And now we're thinking about things like, I want to ask this guy what time it is, but is that bad? In some way, that has to be bad now, right? So you get people apprehensive and they're not talking to each other anymore.
Asking people to suppress stereotypes tends to reinforce them.
Well, now you're thinking about it more, right? If you're constantly thinking about, oh, am I going to say something wrong? Then you're thinking about saying something wrong. You're thinking about those stereotypes. So yes, it puts these things in the forefront of our minds, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Researchers looked at 800 companies after mandatory DEI trainings. 5 years later, no increase in diversity of hiring. Companies actually saw a 9% fall in how many black women were hired.
It's one thing to say they don't work. It's another thing to say they make things worse, right? You would think that people would see that data and change their minds or change their methodologies or something like that. It's not about
data
that, though.
Data doesn't seem to have much to do with it.
No, it's not. It doesn't have much to do with it. It's not about data. It's not really about material change, right? It's about a power grab. It's about a culture change.
And they're winning, it seems to me.
They're winning in certain contexts, yes. They seem to be winning in my field anyway, of rhetoric and composition.
Academia.
Yeah, yes, especially the humanities, social sciences, things like that. And now more and more the sciences, medicine even, but I don't think it's that bad there.
Why isn't it that bad?
I think those fields are more steeped in reason, scientific method. The barriers of idiocy, if you will, are thicker there already.
But I just saw all these medical students reciting privilege messages.
We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression.
Yeah, that's happening. I think a lot of this is performance as well. A lot of this is what people call virtue signaling. That virtue signaling is reaching, theatrical proportions right now.
What made you think something was wrong?
Well, I thought something was wrong for a while. I didn't realize how wrong it was until 2019, when a keynote address at the primary conference for my field, college composition and communication.
Melt the steel bars of racism and white language supremacy.
The keynote argued that, among other things, teaching standard English to students of color, particularly black students, is inherently racist.
If you use a single standard to grade your students' languaging, you engage in racism.
It's racist to teach black kids standard English. That perpetuates white supremacy.
Yes, that's the idea, right? And even the presence of white professors is a problem. That does some kind of psychic harm to students of color. So I heard that, thought it was a bit misguided, and said so on a listserv in my field, the Writing Program Administrators listserv. I put it out there basically in a long-form way, asking, is this really a good idea? Is this the best way to go about this? And what ensued was hardly a conversation. It was more like a social media mobbing session.
You wrote, I'm concerned that the current leadership will have you believe that teaching standard English experiences tyranny by our black and brown co-eds.
Yes, so what they're saying is that to have students of color, especially black students who are descendants of slaves and things like that, to, on top of everything, force them to speak in a way that isn't their language, or write more appropriately in a language that isn't theirs, is inherently oppressive. The idea is that if you learn one dialect, you're replacing another. There's no idea that you're adding a dialect to your repertoire of dialects. That's not a possibility. It has to be rendered as some kind of oppressor-oppressed dichotomy in order to fit a particular narrative.
And isn't it unfair? I mean, I have German parents who learned English in school, and they learned the supposed proper English. It gives a black kid who grew up without hearing that a disadvantage.
All the more reason for that black kid to learn it, at the high school or college level. This is about practicality. It's about pragmatism. It's about looking at a certain situation, gauging the audience, and making sure that you speak or write in a way that will, best persuade them, best get their attention. The whole point of rhetoric is to gauge your situation and act, speak, or write accordingly. Aristotle's definition is the primary definition of rhetoric. Rhetoric is the ability in any given situation to discern the available means of persuasion. So what's available, that depends on who your audience is, what they already know, what they want to know, what their values are, things like that. So if your goal is to persuade, you're going to do whatever it takes to persuade them. And if you can learn a dialect that is prominent in most civic and professional situations in America anyway, you'll be better able to do that. So there's a practicality here that's being ignored. It's all about, this black students are being eclipsed in some way. Their cultures are being suppressed. That's hardly the case.
So you, for arguing this, thought there'd be a discussion.
Well, we are professors in communication. I thought we could communicate. I was so wrong about that. I guess people were sick of the conversation. People often said, we had this conversation already, aren't we past this? And as a rhetorician, you can't say things like that. You're never past a conversation. There's always somebody else who has a say. And if they don't have a say, this is not a pluralistic and civil society. This is something very different. The philosopher Kenneth Burke had a kind of allegory, the parlor allegory, where there's a conversation going on at a party, and you go in. And you can't just start talking right away. You don't know what the topic is. So you have to listen a little bit. In order to contribute, you have to first listen, and then you speak accordingly. That's what we're trying to teach students, or that's what I thought anyway. Now it's about, dignity and decentering whiteness.
Instead of a discussion, people called you racist. Do you enjoy using Western modes of argument to invalidate people of color? Check your privilege.
Yeah. Oh, that old chestnut. Check your privilege. Yeah, that happened. And it happened because what they saw in me was a bigger threat than anything they've seen before. A black person saying it's okay to teach black students standardized English.
Why is that a threat?
It's a threat because when a white person does it, oh, of course you don't understand this. But when I do it, it's a more difficult challenge, right? So they have to, pull out all the stops.
And they did. People piled on. Professor at Portland State said, "Thank you, powerful post," to the person who criticized you. Thank you, Eve. Eve spent tremendous labor, physically, intellectually, and emotionally, to write his response, and most probably took him extra time to recover from that labor. God, it's like they're victims everywhere.
Yes. Well, that's the point. You have to perpetuate the victimhood. That's part of the narrative. The victimhood is being used here as a cudgel of sorts to gain power, right? And to try to decenter what they see as, what they're calling anyway, whiteness or toxic whiteness or white supremacy or something like that. It's a power grab, it's a dignity grab, and that's all it is.
Are they crazy? This just isn't even logical discussion. Has academia gone insane?
Yes, that's the short answer. Yes, it has gone insane. But it's not logic because you need logic. You need reason to build things, right? They want to tear things down. The last thing you want is logic and reason when you want to tear things down. That will slow down the process, if anything.
But there has been stuff that ought to be torn down, right? There has been white supremacy and white control.
Right. There has been all that stuff, and it has been dealt with and is being dealt with in several ways. Unfortunately, a lot of what's going on in my field is more idealist than realist. And what I mean by that is it's easier to change the name of a bridge. It's easier to tell somebody to check their privilege than it is to actually change things institutionally. So they perform this activism and call that progress, right? When in reality, it's really just theater.
What is progress?
Progress is reform, in my opinion.
Meaning what?
And well, you have a conversation, you look at policies, right? You talk about the pros and cons of these policies, the worthiness and unworthiness of them, as classical rhetoricians may say, right? And you act accordingly, you deliberate. That's what's supposed to happen. People think in academia, and this is my take on things based on research and things like that, I think people have come so far, the country has come so far that, talking about racism, oppression, and things like that is losing power. We had a black president for 2 terms. The biggest rising immigrant class is from West Africa. Things are getting better. They're losing that leverage. So they have to.
Victimhood leverage?
Yes. So now they have to really ramp it up.
All white people are racist. I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. I believe that white people are born into not being human.
This is extreme, I take it.
It is extreme, but it's becoming more of the norm and less of an aberration in my field anyway. As far as the people who you hear all the time anyway, there are a lot of people silencing themselves because they don't want to be mobbed. I mean, they saw what they did to a black guy. You know, what are you going to do to white people or even, Latino or Asian or something like that?
They just criticized you. So
Yeah.
what?
Well, I mean, so what is, yeah, you're right. I mean, it didn't really hurt me. In fact, it made me louder. My issue here is the field and the devolution of the field into something I can't even label right now. We're not doing rhetoric anymore. We're doing woke studies, you know, and I think that's a shame. I think my field has a lot to offer, and we're not offering it because we're bogged down by these marginal issues. Now, that is not to say that we can't talk about race and rhetoric simultaneously and center race. We can definitely do that. But that's not what's going on here. What's going on is the perpetuation of a narrative. The narrative is all. That narrative is oppressor, oppressed.
And let's broaden it beyond the field of rhetoric to the whole world here, because what undergraduates are listening to women like this. And I don't know what a student comes away with from that.
Well, I mean, the problem there is that many students are getting one take. The professors or their student leaders, what have you, they're not saying this is one way of looking at things. They're saying this is the way. Anybody opposed to this is opposed to equality. They're opposed to diversity and equity and inclusion, right? And by opposed, I mean anybody who's asking questions, right? Anybody who wants clarification. I was once told that by asking somebody to elaborate, I was trying to silence her.
By asking her to elaborate.
Yes.
Well, as a white person in that class, I would just shut up and figure I have no right to express doubt.
Yeah. About a year back, I had a student, a white student in class, and he came to my office after I said, "This is a safe, you can say what you need to say here. We're going to have conversations, things like that." And he came to my office and he was like, "No, I can't. I cannot do that. And you know I can't do that." And I tried to convince him that in my space, in my class, you can, and he wasn't having it. And he had a point.
White people are socialized to feel they are inherently superior because they are white. By age 3 to 4, children understand it's better to be white. I'm sure there's research that supports that.
Yes, there is.
Shouldn't that be told?
Yes, it should be told, and it should be dealt with. The thing is, a lot of this it happens in a non sequitur manner. What I mean by that is you have a problem and then you have a solution, and the connection is not quite clear, right? So we have students who are 3 years old who think that whiteness is inherently better than blackness, including some black kids who think whiteness is inherently better than blackness. So we need to do what, right? Restorative justice. We need to get rid of AP classes. We need equitable math. We need to stop punishing students who are misbehaving. The solution doesn't match the problem to me. And I think we can have conversations about, proper solutions, but we're not doing that.
What's equitable math?
Equitable math is a document that came out a couple of years ago saying that the way we teach math is inherently racist. It is paternalistic. The teacher shouldn't act like a teacher. The teacher shouldn't expect right answers. The teacher should grade based on the student's desire to know. Because, black kids can't do math.
Got this Microsoft video.
We want to acknowledge that the land where the Microsoft campus is situated was traditionally occupied by the Sammamish, the Duwamish.
It goes on and on.
Yeah.
It's nice to apologize.
Yes, but what is it really doing? The land acknowledgement, other than making the person saying it feel better about himself or herself. I mean, think about it. They're not giving the land back, right? You know, a land acknowledgement is like walking up to somebody who's eating his lunch, taking his sandwich, eating it, and saying, as you eat it, sorry I took your sandwich, you know, as you enjoy that sandwich and walk away. That's what a land acknowledgement is to me. It makes no sense. It's all about performance, and it's about alleviating the guilt of the person giving it.
But they're all doing it so enthusiastically. It's like a religious rite.
Yes, it is kind of like a religious rite. In fact, John McWhorter would say as much, right? Woke racism is about calling this movement a religion, not metaphorically, but literally. And I mean, there's some, I mean, if you follow the research, if you will, you know, and go back, there's a lot of religiosity when it comes to social justice activism. In fact, you know, a lot of this comes from what's called the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism, critical theory, and things like that.
You also have at this Microsoft event, I think, this people doing for blind people. I'm Natalia.
I'm a Caucasian woman with long blonde hair, and I go by she, her.
They all embrace it.
Yeah.
It makes me think I must be not understanding something.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the idea. You know, they want to confuse people as much as they want to virtue signal, right? If you confuse people...
I think they want to make people feel included. They think it'll make others feel included. They're good people.
Yeah, some of them are, you know, and some of them are not.
In Florida, Chris Rufo was appointed to a university board, says he'll replace DEI with EMC, equality, merit, and color blindness.
I like equality and merit and color blindness. I like those things. Those things are being, again, demonized by certain people. Color blindness does not mean you don't see color. It doesn't mean you don't see racism. It means whether I like you or not doesn't depend on your race. That's all it's ever meant. But if you want to spin this into something, if you want to spin this into something that matches the oppressor-oppressed narrative, then you will say something like colorblindness ignores racism and the fact that racism is out there, right? Merit is a good thing. Now, we can talk about what constitutes a meritocracy, you know, what is meritorious and what isn't. We can have a conversation about that, but we need merit. We need a standard in which to measure somebody's aptitude for a certain job or something like that. We need that. And merit is not something we can ever really get rid of. The people who complain about meritocracy have meritocracies. It's just a different one, you know? That meritocracy may be about, you know, who can spout the most woke statements, you know? That gives you merit in some sense. So meritocracy doesn't go away. They just want their meritocracy. I think that should be a conversation.
Is the pendulum swinging back?
I think it is. Yes, and that is a good thing right now. I hope it doesn't swing too far in the other direction. One of my biggest fears this entire time has been the backlash, you know, the potential backlash to all this. You know, how is the pushback going to look? We don't want to get rid of things like ethnic studies. We want to do it right. But if we're swinging to the point where we have to get rid of ethnic studies and other things that are, you know, fine, that's another problem.
Is it anywhere close to swinging too far in the other direction?
Oh, not yet. Not yet. I'm speculating about the future. That's all. And hopefully if we can speculate now, we can avoid that in the future. You know, that's the idea. But yeah, I think it is swinging back.
Why'd you stop being a diversity officer?
Because I felt I was preaching to the choir a lot. With every event I had, it was the same, you know, few people, and that number would get smaller. You know, you can't...
Same few whites or blacks?
Both. Yeah, yeah. It's hard to compel somebody to do things, right? And I don't like being compelled, you know, at all. But when you don't make it mandatory, nobody shows up either, so I just thought it was a useless thing. There's a better way to go about doing this than having a diversity officer do all these events, right?
What's the better way?
Talking. Talking is a good way, right? Talking and being resilient enough to realize that people aren't going to always say things in the way you want them to say it. Realizing that if you walk into something with a good faith attitude, right, that you can probably get farther than if you walk into a place thinking these people are already against me, right? And a lot of that is happening right now. Genuine conversation about what we can do and how we can do it and how we feel. People don't say what they feel because they don't want to get canceled. They don't want to be called racist. They don't want to be called the angry black person, right? So it's all over the place, right? People are censoring